This episode of the .NET Core podcast is supported in part by Productivity in Tech. If you're a developer that wants to share your knowledge with the community, let PIT help you. PIT, or Productivity in Tech, focuses on developer creators. They use state-of-the-art editing tools to make your content look and sound great. If you need help getting your show content off the ground, their consulting services will help you answer any questions you have about starting a podcast, creating or maintaining a YouTube channel, running a newsletter, creating and hosting online courses, and many more. If you just need or want to save time or increase the amount of content that you produce, PIT is the answer. Productivity in Tech was started in 2016 by podcaster Jay Miller. Jay has helped many podcast and content creators with their shows, including this one. You'll have noticed that most of the episodes of this show have transcriptions. That's all thanks to PIT. The long and short of it is, I send them the interview, and within 24 to 48 hours, I get a full transcription of the interview back. Don't let "I don't have the time" prevent you from creating content that will encourage, inform, and inspire others. PIT provides services at an affordable rate, so whether you are backed by a business or just trying to build your portfolio or unleash your creative side, PIT has a plan that can help you out. Visit productivityintech.com/.NET Core for more information and to let them know that you heard about them through us. Let PIT help you be more productive today. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast. The only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Caprogman-Taylor, and this is episode 29, Developer Relations and Education with Jasmine Green and Cecil Phillip. In this episode, I interviewed Jasmine and Cecil about their roles at Microsoft in developer relations, some of the things that Microsoft are doing to help us developers keep our skills sharp, and our own experiences on being on both sides of the lectern. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So first of all, I'd like to thank you both, Jasmine and Cecil, for being on the show today. I appreciate you very busy people and taking the time out to talk with me and the listeners. I really appreciate that. Thank you ever so much.
Sure, no problem at all.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. So I thought maybe we could start with a little bit of an introduction, if that's okay. So maybe, maybe you could introduce yourself to the listeners in case they haven't heard of some of the work you do or that kind of thing. Is that okay?
Sure. My name is Jasmine Greenaway. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, focusing on the education audience in developer relations.
And just like Jasmine, I'm also a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. Also on the same team, focusing on making sure that we support academics and, some of that educational side of things.
Fantastic. It's great to have you both on the show. It's hopefully going to be a very interesting talk. A little bit different to what we normally talk about, but I think that, education and academia is very important to all of us, regardless of whether we came from so I came from a purely academic background. So I went to university and studied computer science. Not everyone does that these days. There's a lot of people who are self-taught, and a lot of people who go to code camps, and a lot of people just sort of pick it up as they go along. And all of that is fantastic and perfectly fine. But yeah, I like that we're going to talk a little bit about the academia side of it, I guess. Well, I guess when we get around to discussing what it is that, your job role entails, I guess we'll get a little bit more into what that means.
Sure, definitely. Actually, I'd love to hear if you could tell us what exactly got you into technology.
Ooh, now this is an interesting question. I like this. Turn the tables.
Yeah, I'm interviewing the interviewer.
Yeah, I like it. So for me, I would have been about, I want to say 7 or 8 years old. And I came home from school one day and my parents had bought me, now I'm going to drop the name of the device, but I don't think you will have heard of it simply because it's a British brand of computer. It's an Amstrad CPC 464.
No, I haven't heard about that one.
There you go. You see, so this would have been in the very early 90s. I mean, they came out in the early 80s, but we got one secondhand when everyone had sort of had enough of using them. But this was essentially, how like the ZX Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum was a computer inside of a keyboard.
Yeah.
This is the same kind of deal, except there was a tape deck attached to the keyboard on the right-hand side of the number pad.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Interesting.
And this thing came with a book on BASIC, the version of BASIC that it used, and lots of exercises and lots of things to do. And essentially, one rainy summer afternoon, because I'm British and it always rains in the summer, we set up the computer, and I just sat there typing all day, learning how to use this computer. And I ended up creating lots of little programs that, the traditional sort of 10 print go to 20, 20 go to 10, sorry. I essentially started with that and then worked up to having a stick figure on screen and animating that moving around on screen. And essentially I fell in love with, hey, there's this machine here and I can make it do stuff.
Huh.
That's awesome.
So, the reason I wanted to ask you that question was because I always find it interesting to hear like the genesis stories from a lot of people, because everybody has such a different path that they took to get to where they are today. And it's always interesting to hear, hey, I wanted to build games, or, I was a music teacher or a math teacher, or, whatever the case is, right? And I kind of found my way into technology. And I think that's important to recognize and respect too, because that kind of helps us understand the way that people are learning about technology and software development, and obviously some of the tools that we make at Microsoft. And it helps us understand like what can we best do to support those types of people.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense, and it also helps with. Say if I'm working on a team, and I know that obviously I came from an academic background. Like I said earlier, I took computer science at university, so I know sort of the math side of things. I know how it should work. Whereas I might be working with someone who came from a code camp, and I might be working with someone else who is completely self-taught. So I know that I don't not that I have to change my language, but I need to maybe acknowledge that and appreciate that when I'm communicating with them about technical points of view and technical issues. And I may be able to get away with saying, hey, I think we should use a bubble sort here. Or maybe I can't get away with it because maybe the person who's self-taught doesn't know what bubble sort is. Or maybe, and I don't want to pick on them, maybe the person who went to the code camp doesn't know what a bubble sort is. I don't know. I've never been to a code camp, so I don't know what kind of things people get taught. And I don't know what kind of tools that people have experience with. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. This sort of getting to know that person's origin story, so then you can understand their point of view and where they're coming from.
Sure, for sure. Jasmine, how did you get started?
So for me, I came from actually quite a number of people from the MySpace age, when you could customize your social network site. So for me, it was MySpace, LiveJournal, and Zanga. And then some engineers and people in the industry that I know also use this one called Neopets. It's kind of like you take care of your own pet on this online platform and play games to earn like all kinds of points to like dress up your pets and stuff like that. So I started from there, but it wasn't like a long-term, like it wasn't a career option that I was thinking about until I got to university, and I minored in computer science because the degree I was going for gave me I wanted it to give me a better competitive edge when I graduated from college, and I liked computer science better. So I majored in computer science, or in software engineering. So James, you mentioned something very interesting about the learning, working in a team, and talking about the backgrounds that they might have come from. So for me, because I did my major in software engineering, I was so a lot of my coursework was centered around not only CS theory or computer science theory, but also centered on project management, things like testing. I had a class on like designing software. And so things like we like bubble sort we briefly touched on, but we never really got like a full in-depth like understanding. But I know it's something that exists. So I find it very interesting working with different teams and people of different backgrounds, including in the open source world, because it's really fascinating to see how people learn and like their path and how their path has brought them to where we are in in this code base or code review.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, everyone has a role to play in the modern tech space, and everyone's opinion is equally valid. So let's bring everyone together, appreciate where we've all come from, and appreciate our backgrounds, and because we're all after the same goal, right? So we're on a team to create products for people to use, and I think it's in the Phoenix project, one of the characters in that says essentially what we are making has no value until it gets into the customer's hands. So let's do that and then worry about any sort of friction that we may have or something. Let's figure out a way of working together as a team, appreciating everyone's background and appreciating where we've all come from, and taking on board everyone's opinions, and see what we can do and make this amazing product and ship it to the customer.
Yeah. Oh, Cecil, what about your background?
So when I first got into computers, I was in high school, and like my school didn't have computers or a computer science program and everything like that. And so my dad, he brought home this old compact Presario, like,
yes,
I don't know if you remember these old, the compact lines of computers. Mm-hmm. But, essentially those were the days when like you bought a computer and it came with like a set of books, you know what I mean? And in one of those books, there was this thing about like HTML and creating your first web page. And so, it was one summer and I was bored, and, I started going through this book. And I think one of the first exercises was for you to, create like an H tag or something like that, and then you put your name on the screen. And I did it. It was super quick. I did it in Notepad, and like it was the most exciting thing I'd ever seen, right? Because here I am, like with this foreign machine, right? And I would just put my name on the screen. I thought it was the most exciting thing in the world. So I'm calling my friends on the phone and telling them, "Yo, you need to come over. Like my name's on the computer. You need to come see this. You know what I mean? Come over. I'll put your name on the computer too." Like it was. Like looking back at it, obviously it sounds like super trivial, but, at that moment, like I felt like so empowered and just so excited about it. And again, like we didn't have like a computer science curriculum or even computers in school at the time. So I was, whenever my family would like leave Antigua and visit the United States or somewhere else, like they'd bring me back books, and I just, whatever it is that they brought me back, like I just ingest that material until eventually I was able to go to college and do computer science.
Oh, that's awesome. So both Cecil and I have also taught at taught computer science classes at our respective communities and colleges near where we live. So I'm based in New York and Cecil's based in Florida, and I feel like Cecil probably can also speak to this. I really love when when I'm working with students and we walk through like an example, and it's time for them to try out this thing that we just learned, and just seeing their face light up saying, "Hey, wait, I figured it out. Oh my goodness, I did this. My computer can do this." It's always a gratifying experience, and always great to see them start from being very nervous and anxious about not they're like, is it a lot of math? Do you have to be, they're like, you have to be super smart to do this. And, really just breaking it down and showing them, from, part one to part whatever, like, just teaching them these building blocks, and, and to get to this point where, whether it's like an entire, like a website or something even as small as just like getting, like Cecil was talking about, getting your, like putting your name on like a site or a program. So yeah, I don't know if Cecil has any more about that or more on that.
Yeah, I think it's amazing and like extremely gratifying to see the eyes of your students light up, or, whether it's your student or your family member or somebody that's just, happens to be sitting down next to you at the computer. being able to see their eyes light up and like the excitement and the joy of like, wow, I just did this. Yeah, that's extremely motivating for me, particularly to like even up to this moment today. And like I think about the different students that we work with, and some of the things that we kind of help them go through, and it makes me very humble and appreciative of that fact too. Because you think as professional developers, so to speak, like we're in this every day and we see these things, and some things as basic as doing stuff in the command line, or like firing up Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. But for them, this is like, it's like magic, right? Like they don't understand how this works, and they've never seen a lot of these pieces before.
Mm-hmm.
To see the new excitement gets me even more excited to go back to work and do even more at my job.
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that. For a short while after university, I worked as a maths teacher, and I like to use the phrase empowering, but I worry that it's not the right phrase. But when you're able to sort of impart some knowledge onto someone and they go, hey, wait, I think I get it. And then they do it for themselves. They take that knowledge, they apply it in their own way and find the answer. Or in this case, they take the knowledge that you've imparted on. The example you gave was, let's create a H tag and put your name in the computer. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't sound like a lot to us, but to someone who has never known how to do that, someone who's never been given the chance to do anything like that, it's magic, and it's wonderful just watching them light up, and then they instantly start thinking of other possibilities. Now, obviously, just putting your name inside of a H tag isn't going to come up, you're maybe not going to come up with the greatest set of possibilities ever. But I remember when I was at university, we had a small hackathon where someone had managed to use some C# library to control characters in an Unreal Tournament game. And when they announced that in the lecture, somebody went, oh my God, I can create Solid Snake and have him sort of sneak around against the walls. And it's those moments where someone just goes, wow, this is a fantastic idea, and I'm so excited that it's magic.
I really think that kind of highlights how us as an industry, like we need to pay more attention to like the generation that kind of follows us, right? And I think things like mentors are very important, and people just being able to spend their time with you and have conversations with you about, these are the mistakes that I made, and like this is the journey that I went through. I think it's important for us to not only give them guidance and encouragement, but also just be an ear to listen, right? Be an ear to listen and for you to understand, this is how things are different for me today as I'm building software. I kind of realize, how we as a community can kind of come together and like help all of us like elevate together.
Yeah, I agree. Back when I was, tinkering around on like MySpace and LiveJournal, there wasn't many, resources available to me to like learn how to, do this like stuff. I wasn't even realizing that there's like books and things like that. But now, like, it's very easy to have access, or there's lots of access to different types of technologies that anyone can learn. But that's only part of it, like how do you, so you can learn learn a language or learn technology, but then comes a part of learning how to work with a team, work with, learn how to communicate efficiently, learn how to, work productively when you're working from home and things like that. And it's really great to have like somebody who you can go to and talk to and, kind of have these like discussions, outside of, just like what the technology can do for you.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Jamie, how did you get into teaching? Like, I'd love to hear how that started.
I'd always wanted to teach something, because it's that moment, I mean, you both touched on it earlier on, where you say, you impart this knowledge and it ignites a spark, and somebody, I think you both used the phrase, you see it in their eyes, you can see this sort of thing lighting up in their face, and they go, oh my goodness, and it's you're imparting this knowledge and saying, this is how you can do this thing. And you can do that in almost anything. You can do it with maths, you can do it with computers, you can do it with technology, you can do it with language, you can do it with anything. Here is how to do a thing, and here is some knowledge, and go change the world with this knowledge that you have. Or create this thing, go be creative with it. And if I'm honest, I really love that moment when I'm able to say to someone, hey, this is a thing, go do it. So earlier this week, I was saying to my son about how he asked me, why are rockets so big? Why are these space rockets so big if the people who get in them are so small? And I said, well, most of it is fuel, and so I got, what I did was I went and got 2 bottles of milk. One was an empty bottle and one was full of milk. And I said, lift the empty bottle. Can you see how it's really easy? There's no effort required. Now lift the full bottle. And, he's quite young, so lifting it was quite hard. And he was straining a lot. And I said, did you notice how you had to put more energy into lifting the heavy bottle? Yes. Well, the rocket is kind of like that full bottle in that you have to push really hard to make it go really high. So to create that push, we put loads of fuel into it and burn the fuel, which creates the fire, which pushes it up. But it needs to be so big to contain all of this fuel. When actually, like you said, the spacemen, bless him, that's what he said, the spacemen are really small and only sit right at the front. So then as the rocket starts to lift up and all this fuel gets burnt, there are parts that are now empty because there's no fuel. So they just detach and fall back to Earth. But because it's been pushed, and then we went outside and we pushed a big rock, and I said, when you let go, when you stop pushing, it'll keep going, won't it? Oh yeah, well that's what's happening with this rocket. Now that the fire's gone out, it's still pushing up a little bit, and it just needs to push really hard to beat a thing called gravity. And then to explain what gravity was, I went and grabbed an apple, and I said, what do you think will happen when I drop the apple? He said, it will fall to the floor. And then I explained how gravity it's an invisible force which helps us to stay on the ground. So we have to push really hard against gravity to get the apple to go up. And I got him to throw the apple up into the air a few times for him to figure out how much energy his arm had to exert to throw the apple. And I said, please don't, but imagine how hard you would have to lift and throw the milk bottle. That milk container full of milk, how much effort you would have to. That's essentially what a rocket is doing when it sets off. And his eyes all lit up and he was like, oh wow, it's no longer magic. I understand how it works. And he was walking around the house lifting things up and putting them back down to see how much effort it required to lift them up, and just watching him sort of explore his world. This new thing has opened up, this new understanding of how something works. He came over and he lifted up I have a bottle that I have water in because I'm always drinking water. And he lifted that up and he went, oh, it's nearly empty. That's really light. And then 10 minutes later, when it was full again and I'm drinking from it, he came over, took it out of my hands and was lifting it up and down again. And he said, oh, well, that's heavier now. I understand that. That's heavier. So that means I have to lift further. That's because gravity's pulling it down harder. And it just all clicked for him. And I love those moments, just watching someone figure out how it all fits together.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. It's truly a blessing to be a part of that, right? To be a part of somebody's learning experience and to give them the tools or even just the spark that they need to kind of take that information and just go ahead and create like amazing things with it.
Yeah. I really every once in a while notice that like moment when they get it. You kind of like see it on their face a little bit sometimes. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's almost like an adrenaline rush for yourself, seeing it happen. It is amazing, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Anytime someone asks me, especially if it's people who are, I don't know what it is. There are certain topics that you can help someone understand that they just kind of, they go in and it's like, yep, no, I understand that now. I'm going to go and do whatever it was I was doing. But then there are certain topics that no matter who you speak to about it, there will always be that moment, that recognition, that spark in the eye, that change in the behavior that makes them get really excited. Oh, wow, I've just learned this thing. And it happens more, I think, with younger. So maybe I see it a lot more with people who are younger than 16 years old. I don't see it so much with adults, I guess, but definitely with children. But yeah, you can get that experience from anyone. And for me, at the very least, it's a bit of an adrenaline rush. This, wow, I've just helped to change this person's life, because we have, like you were saying, Cecil, I put my name in the computer and then I told my friends to come over. You were excited to show your friends, and more than likely they were excited to see it too. And then you've changed your life. You've changed the lives of your friends. And then you were saying when your relatives would come home with all of these books for you to read, that would change your life too. And it's this whole, almost like an economy of constantly changing everyone's lives, constantly improving people's lives. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. One of the things I love to say is that learning is very much of a social exercise. Like when I think about how I used to learn, like back when I was in high school, right? It was, I had to leave my house. I had to walk to the library. And then when you got into the library, like you had to go find the book. Then you had to go sit in the corner and be quiet. Right. And you had to read this book, right? You couldn't make any noise and didn't want to disturb anybody. And And I always thought that that was weird, right? Because, I go to school with like a group of people, right? A group of students, a group of kids or whatever. And we're all learning together and we're talking and we're asking questions and I'm listening to other people ask questions and their questions are sparking my questions. You know what I mean? And it's very much of a community type setting, right? And I think even today, like that's how we should always approach learning. If you might know something that I don't know and I don't know something that you might not know, but we could bring them together and we could share our experiences and we could solve the problem or create something new and really interesting. And so that's why I'm always interested in like connecting those dots, right? Like I always try to encourage students to, work together on projects and, share your code. That's fine. Put your stuff on GitHub. If you're not sure about something, go ahead and ask. Like it's totally fine to ask. Ask as many times as you need. And like no question is a silly question. As long as I could give you or, whoever it is can give you the tools to be able to take that next step forward in solving whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve. And I think that's one thing we don't do a tremendously good job at as software engineers. Like when you think about like you go to a company, like as a junior developer, and some companies do this and some companies don't, but I find in general, like when you go to a company, it's just like, hey, I'm a junior developer. And like the senior guy might show you how to get your account set up and, where the software is and da 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 da. But then when it really comes down to patterns and practices and, this is, don't do this, don't do that. Like, I don't find we do a really good job at that. And so I think that's one of the things too, like you'll see like me and Jasmine and our team, like we're trying to create a place and an experience for students where they feel like they do have somebody that they could talk to and a place that they could ask questions and not feel ridiculed by it, or a place where it's very low stress. You know what I mean? Like your job is not dependent on you knowing these things that you're asking me about. And then we can have a very calm and relaxing conversation, again, without you feeling the pressures of ridicule or work or timelines or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I agree. Just thinking about my experience, coming out of university, a lot of the things that I know now, I learned, on the job. University prepped me, a bit, but I learned like things like, Git on the job. I write mostly C#, and I didn't really learn that until maybe like a year after I graduated. And that's why, and for me, part of the thing that I really like to do in my team is attend hackathons. So we'll usually, a few of us from the team will go to these hackathons as mentors and like help students, like, help set up their development environment, help them show them how to set up their repo so that they can, collaborate together and things like that, or even API questions, or even pointing them to docs, because it's so easy, to say, I want to start this thing, I want to get started, but sometimes you're not sure if you have all the tools that you need or all the information that you need to get started. So part of reasons why I love like going to hackathons and showing them like, here, try this path, try this thing, and like kind of giving them that push they need to get to the next point in their project that they want to be.
I know that I've been to a few hackathons over here in the UK, but mostly as a person trying to win. I haven't had a chance to be the sort of mentor role. I think maybe the next hackathon I attend, I'll ask whether I can help out rather than to see whether I can build something, because I think that would be quite useful, even if I'm just walking around going, hey, do you need anything? Is there anything I can help with? Just being there just to sort of bounce an idea off of. Maybe just do some, I use the phrase rubber duck debugging. I know that one of the people I work with at the moment calls it plastic programming or cardboard programming, in that you could replace the person you're talking to with a cardboard cutout in the same way that you can replace the person you're talking to with a rubber duck, because all you're doing is you're just sounding the problem out and trying to figure out the solution. And, I love that when someone's talking to me and they're trying to figure it out, and then they'll stop themselves partway through the sentence and go, thanks, Jamie, and walk away. And I'm like, okay, I didn't do anything here, but yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Yes.
So Jasmine, you're in New York, right? And I know New York has tons of hackathons and events and things like that. And, one of the things I often hear here in Florida is like, how do you know about these things? And how do you find out about events and user groups and hackathons and those types of things that I can get involved with? So like in New York specifically, like how do you find out about these things?
So, specifically in New York, I do not have an answer for that. Thankfully, on our team, we have some amazing people who are able to find a lot of these hackathons that I learned from them. But for me, my main source has been this site called DevPost because they have remote and they also have in-person hackathons that you can enter. So that's my main source. But do you have any resources on, or either of you have any resources on where folks can find more hackathons?
I know for me, it's always been a case of like with education and our industry needing to be very social. I think a part of that too is one kind of just putting yourself out there, right? And letting people know that you want to be found, which might be a little bit of a weird thing to say. But, I'll show you, for instance, I started with going to like local user groups. And I found out because, I was out one day and there was this conference. It was free. I went to the conference, spoke to some folks that were there. I've never been before. So, these are all new faces and new people to me. And they're like, oh, yeah, we have this group and that group and this group and that group. And I learned about all of these things that were happening. But again, me and my job and my 8 to 5 bubble had no idea about any of these things. But like the minute I stepped outside of that, like I started to find out about all this stuff that was going on. So, that led to, oh, here's these hackathon things. And oh, here are these startups and here are these schools and like all of those types of things. So I think it just takes like a little bit of effort to like step out a little bit. I think meetup.com is a good site that, a lot of us use a lot of the time, newsletters. And I'll also say like based on whatever your focus might be. So maybe your focus is React or machine learning or, Docker and Kubernetes and things of that nature. Go online and just do a quick web search and see what's happening, particularly in your area, because most of these things are always online. There's online registrations and things of that nature, and they're also looking for volunteers a lot of the times too. And volunteering is a great way to just kind of introduce yourself into that new environment, right? Like, let me come in and kind of help set it up, or help talk to folks or mentor or anything like that. And then that'll just kind of help get your feet wet and help you understand like what exactly does it mean to be a part of this environment.
Definitely. I'll like to point out that giving talks is a great way to do it as well, because you're taking the knowledge and experience you have, and you're showing how you've applied it to solve a specific set of problems. I mean, you don't have to give a talk on, here is this brand new technology and I'm going to show you in a live demo and hope that the powers that be are smiling at me so that my live demo works. You can just sort of stand there and say, so we had this problem and we decided we needed to use Docker, and I've never used Docker before, so I went and learned how to use Docker, and here's how I used Docker to solve this problem. I said Docker way too many times there. But, that kind of, I've used this technology to solve this problem, and this is how I did it, versus this is how the docs say you should do it, because, this version that I used solved the problem quicker, and if I had chance, I'd go back and, do what the docs say. But that kind of, just that sort of hands-on experience, that sort of sharing, it's almost like a mentorship. It's, here is how I solved this problem, or here is how I went about trying to learn how to solve the problem. And maybe I didn't solve the problem, but these are some of the things that I did that didn't work for me. I think that can be really useful too. At least that's how I try to give my talks. Hey, I was an idiot. This is what I did. And it kind of worked. And I'm really surprised because, I'm not very good at doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I totally understand. I feel like that's one of the things that I love a lot about what we do here on our team is because, we're allotted time to, do our self-guided learning, and Microsoft gives us a lot of resources to learn, on our own and, learn something new. And for me, when I joined Microsoft, I had like a little bit of exposure to Azure, but I didn't know, a lot. And so one of the things I would do is I would go just pick a service in Azure and just, maybe go through a tutorial or poke around. And then when I, maybe make a proof of concept, and when I find something, or a service that really sticks, or something that, a project that I'm really getting into, I use it as an opportunity to write a blog post or do a talk, or just show somebody else like how, what I learned and how I applied it to a situation.
Sure, I did something similar when .NET Core first came out. I built essentially a web API. It used N-tier architecture. I'm going to throw a lot of words out, and I don't know whether all of the listeners will know what they mean. Hopefully, they will. Maybe not. But it was an ASP.NET Core web API using an N-tier architecture to talk to a SQLite database, and it used Entity Framework Core and did a whole bunch of stuff. And I was like, right, I need to learn how to use ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework Core, and I want to put it on Azure. So how do I learn how to use Azure? So I did all of that, and then I stepped back and went, wouldn't it be great if that was all documented somewhere, this sort of journey of how to create a... Wait a minute, I'll start a blog and just blog about my journey in creating this little app. And it turned out that it was incredibly useful for people because I saw that the place where I was working, there were people at work going to that blog to learn how to use the technology so that then they could use it on their next project. And I kept, the IP addresses in, the analytics and things kept showing up. I was like, hey, this is kind of useful to people. And it is. It's really useful just sort of sharing that knowledge.
So I think one of the things that we're trying to do as a team is really try to, I think at this point right now, like really just trying to understand like what are the needs of people. And when I say people, I mean from folks in grade school to university to folks that are changing careers and things of that nature. Really just try to understand like what is it exactly that they need to learn. And one of the things I always say is like learning is such a personal thing, right? Because we all learn in such a different way. I remember when I used to teach my university course, like I'd have students that are as young as 16 and I'd have some like, late 20s. And then I think my oldest student was probably like 54, 56 years old. And anytime I'd give out an assignment, like I'd usually give like a research, quote unquote, research aspect of the assignment. But like they'd all do it so differently, right? Like, so if I gave reading material, like my older students would always read, but like my 16-year-olds would never read anything. But like if I gave videos to watch or anything that they could look at, like they'd totally watch them for sure. Like they'd watch them like multiple times. But like my older students want to read. And then I'd have some students that are just more hands-on. They just want you to show them how things work. So when you think about how you approach teaching somebody something, like you got to think about like what's the best way for us to craft content for them to consume. And that's what you'll notice like across our team. Like we have Microsoft Learn right now, which is very much of an online learning platform. So, you can go through and you could read and you can try out some exercises right there inside of your browser. One thing that I'm also focused on is like I do a lot of video content and, through the On.NET show and Channel 9 at Microsoft. And we create a lot of video experiences for you to watch and you can understand like what's happening in certain products and how do certain APIs work and SDKs and services and things of that nature. And then, a lot of other folks on our team, like, folks like Jasmine and tons of others, like they do a lot of workshops, they do a lot of hackathons and a lot of in-person type experiences, which kind of gives you like that hands-on methodology of learning, which I think is also important too. And so I think you need to have all three of these together to really help folks understand or really help them absorb the information in like a very deep way. You know what I mean? And so again, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is just make sure that we could approach them in a way that's interesting, that's fun, but also too like we could reach you in the way that you want to learn, and you can do it at your own pace and your own time.
Yeah, I agree. And the nice thing about what Microsoft does when it comes to technology, it's always well documented. It's always available on docs.microsoft.com and also, available on GitHub. So like if somebody realizes that there is something off about the documentation, they can always go and make, a submission to the Microsoft Docs and, fix that. And that's also another also great way to learn is just going through those documentation. I mean, I do that a lot, especially when whenever I'm at a conference and maybe I'm at the booth and, somebody asks me, oh, hey, I don't know much about this product or this service. Could you give me some information about it? I always point them, to the docs because it's always just a central location for getting the full scope of the information that you need to get the job done or to get to a point where you want to be in terms of your project or the thing, whatever you might be building.
Yeah, and definitely what I'd say to anybody that might be an educator or in the university or coded school or anything like that, like definitely reach out to us and let us know like what are some of the ways that we could help support you from, I know, whether it's, workshop material or coding samples or anything like that. Like we'd love to hear what are the types of problems that you're trying to solve in terms of delivering content and keeping information fresh and keeping it interesting for your students, and try to see how we can kind of help you do that, obviously with our help.
And the last thing you just mentioned, Cecil, yeah, I think it's also important that we have support for educators who, want to teach their students how to learn something, whether it be computer science or maybe just even learning about cloud technology through Azure. It's so easy to, want to be able to reach students, but also it's also important to keep in mind how we're, showing instructors how they can show students and help students how to, make a website or work on like a serverless cloud solution or something like that. So I think, part of our, job is also to equip instructors with the tools they need to show students how they can do those things. And that's really an important point there you made, Cecil.
Like, what would you say are some of the questions that you get the most from students and from people that are trying to get into the industry? Because I think for students, like that's often a place of like fear, concern, worry. Like, oh my God, am I studying the right thing, or am I taking the right class, or like what do you tell people when they ask you those types of questions?
So for me, most the questions are, I feel like a lot of them turn out to be, how can I get a job in the industry? And then that turns into, well, what entices you? What are you interested about learning in the industry? And they'll say, X, Y, and Z. So say, for example, let's take, web development. So I'll say, I'd probably say something like, think about, the building blocks of the web, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And I tell them, okay, so that's probably where you want to start. And so what I like to do is give them like the foundation, like where is that starting point for someone to go forward. So for them, it would be, if they already know HTML and CSS, okay, then maybe it's time to, look at JavaScript. Here's some documentation, and here are some, fun projects that I've seen, because I find it important to give folks examples on the possibilities that they can have with a certain technology, because I find that especially when I'm instructing students, showing them what is possible really excites them and really gets them excited or motivated to try and not replicate what I'm showing them, but to get started to learn how they can do it themselves. So I'll send them with like some foundational points. I'll set them with some inspirational resources.
That sounds a little bit like so one of the examples I always throw out about my sort of teaching style from back when I was a teacher was, I used to go into different, I guess it was a bit intrusive, but I used to go into other lessons when I wasn't teaching during that period and sort of try and figure out how the other teachers were working, because I was really new to it. Let's take circumference of a circle, right? One teacher would draw a circle on the board and then make a point in the center and draw a line from the point to the outside of the circle and just write down the formula and just leave it at that and say, get your calculators out and work that out. And then another person would take the students on a journey where they were learning a little bit about Greek and why it's called radius and why we do things with pi and all this theoretical stuff. I turned up to the class one day and I said, right, we're going to learn about the circumference of a circle. And I got my bicycle, and I said, let's look at the front wheel. I don't know how big the front wheel is, but I can measure with a ruler or with a measuring tape from the center out to the edge. And we'll call that something. We'll come up with a name. Well, let's call it the radius. I don't know why, but let's choose that word radius. And then we talked about how to get from the radius to what the circumference was. And then I said, right, okay, we know how long the circumference is, what the measurement of the wheel is. So why don't we put a little clicker on the wheel? And every time it rotates all the way around, we know that the wheel has traveled the length of the circumference if it was laid down in a line. And then we sort of wheeled the bicycle around the school and counted how many times it clicked. And when we got back to the class, we went, right, okay, how many times did it click? Oh, it clicked, say, 120 times. how far did we travel? Oh, we traveled this far. How did we work that out? We measured the distance from the center of the wheel to the outside of the wheel. And it's that sort of making it, like you were saying, Jasmine, that sort of making it engaging, bringing the students in and giving them something to do. Maybe that's not the best way to do it. Maybe it is. I don't know.
So here's a question for both of you, specifically if you want to learn .NET, like what's the path that you take? What's your go-to, methodology? Yeah, like say like a new API comes out, or because I always look at this industry as this is a constantly learning industry. Whether you're doing .NET, whether you're doing mobile, whether you're doing web, whether you're doing cloud, like new stuff is always going to come out, and somebody's going to have a new framework or library or something like that you need to figure out, right, and incorporate into your product. I think that's an important thing for everyone that's trying to come into this field to understand, right? Like you always have to keep learning stuff.
Yes.
So like I think as engineers, like we have to be very efficient at it. You know what I mean? Like we can't take months upon months to learn stuff. Like sometimes you got to pick up stuff really quickly. We don't have to learn everything, obviously, but like for the things that we need to pick up, like we need to be able to pick it up quickly and kind of keep moving. And so like I think it's important for all of us to have like a thing, right? Like maybe I reach for books first, or maybe some folks like Pluralsight or LinkedIn Learning or like online courses and things like that. Or maybe they go the route of doing something like edX or Coursera, like there's so many different ways to do it, but I find like everybody has like their thing, right? Like their own branch that they take to kind of figure that stuff out.
I would say for me, it's mostly, I look at code first. I'll look at examples. And then you'll find me like looking at the docs, because usually if it's something, new with .NET, will have to refer to the docs and say like, oh, well, what does this thing exactly do? So it's usually code first, then docs later.
For me, I'm a little different. So because I've done a lot of, most of my career, aside from when I was teaching, was all about making a product, make a thing and ship it to the customer. So for me, it's a case of, I'll try to figure out what this thing is and how it will help me to do my job, whatever that job is. And I will try and focus on the tiny part that I need to know. So like the example you gave there, Cecil, was let's learn .NET. Well, .NET's huge. There's server-side stuff, there's desktop stuff, there's web API stuff, there's now a way to run .NET inside your browser, so you can run it in the browser. You can write apps on your computer and have them sent over to your iPhone or your Android or your tablet or whatever. It's a huge subject. So rather than let's learn .NET, let's learn this little thing that I need to know about .NET, and then slowly build on top of that. But I've always found that the only way that works for me is if I can build something with it. So the example I gave earlier on about I wanted to build a web API to be able to throw it onto Azure was I wanted to learn how to take a web API and put it on Azure, because a project I was working on during my workday was I had to take a pre-existing web API and put it on Azure. So I got to learn how to do that, and I couldn't do it during work time because I had other responsibilities. So let's build something really quickly and let's figure out how to put it there using the fewest steps possible. And then maybe when I'm done, I'll go back and learn why is it that whilst I can do FTP delivery, it's maybe better, and I'm using the bunny quotes there, maybe it's better to use Azure DevOps to push a button and use a service principal to do that for me? Or why is it better to use, let's say it might be better to use a build agent or a deployment system or some other third-party tool? Well, once I've got it working first, I'll then go back and figure out the whys. So I think I do things the opposite way, I guess, to you, Jasmine.
Yeah, sounds like it. But one thing that I did before I did developer relations, I found that I'd be working on something and, it'd be a new technology. So, for example, when MVC, ASP.NET MVC, I believe it was 3 came out, I didn't know much JavaScript, and I kind of had to learn it on the job. So for me, like I'm just kind of thinking about how, the opposite. So I was, building the application, working on the application, but also like referring to docs and like thinking, looking at how it compares against what I built. or just referring to those docs to help me, get to the next step. One thing I also love to do is especially when I'm learning like a new programming language, is I build something and I go look at some code that I know is going to be, it's like written by somebody who has written the language for a while or works at language, and looking at how they've done things or how they've solved like a specific problem, and looking and comparing mine, be like, oh wow, mine, oh, our solution's kind of the same. Oh, look how they did it.
Yeah, I always love comparing because there's more than one way to solve any problem in the business we're in, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that you and I are both tasked with, here is a list of items, get them into alphabetical or ascending to descending order or something. Here's a list of stuff, sort it for me. I'll go away and do it one way, and you may go and do it a different way, and we may end up with the same result. We both have the list sorted in whatever order we were tasked with, but you may have gone and done a breadth first, divide and conquer, and all these kinds of different, or maybe you've just used JavaScript and gone dot sort, whereas I've gone away and maybe I've gone and I've maybe sat and tried to do some thinking about it. Well, it's a partially sorted list, and it's this, that, and the other. Or maybe I didn't. Maybe I just went, you know what? I'll fake it, and I'll just write the list out manually write it out in the right order. I don't know. But each of those is, aside from my last example, is a valid way of sorting that list. And so it's comparing those two. You can get an idea of what the person was thinking and how they got to that solution. And then, like you say, it's a great way to sort of improve your own thinking, because you then go, oh, I see. That's how that person broke that task down. They focused on this part first, whereas I focused on this part. I wonder why they focused on that part. Well, this person is much more experienced, and maybe they've seen these kinds of things before. I think Scott Hanselman had a blog post out last year that was, how do you know all this crap? And he said, well, it's kind of a gut feeling and kind of a bit of education and experience and gut feeling. Maybe it's a combination of those. But then maybe you don't meet someone who's done all of that. Maybe you meet someone who's fresh out of school, who then is very much a case of, let's do it the theoretical way. And then you meet someone who's taught themselves from the docs, from Stack Overflow, from looking around on the web, from asking other people, from being mentored by people. And maybe they've got a much more elegant solution than anyone else.
Yeah, that's why I'd always go back to say, learning today is such a social thing. Like, it has to be a social thing, right? And one of the reasons why I love like websites like GitHub so much is that, we could learn from each other without even having to engage with each other too much, right? Like, I could kind of go and look at your code, and I could see what you did. And if I need to, then I could ask you questions via the GitHub issue, or send you a message or something like that. And I find those ways are so much richer, like when we could do things like that, and we can engage with each other in a way that we could share our knowledge. And obviously, everybody's opinion, that doesn't make everybody's opinion right or wrong, or, it doesn't make your opinion any better than mine, because like we all are coming in from things at a different angle with different use cases. But still, like, being able to understand different sides of how to solve the same problem is only going to make us better at the end of the day.
Definitely. I mean, you just look at, for instance, cooking. We've talked a lot about sort of technology and development, I guess, so far. But what about with cooking, right? You've got one person who knows how to cook a dish one way, and another person who knows how to cook the same dish in a slightly different way. Those are two both valid algorithms, I guess, to try and make it fit what we're talking about, to sort of bend that metaphor. They're both the same. They may not be the same process, but they both have the same end result. One method takes 5 minutes less, but it doesn't yield as good of a result. And maybe the other method takes longer and yields a slightly better result. And comparing those notes and figuring out how each of us got to those stages is a great way to learn. Like you say, it's I can learn from you by seeing how you've done it, and you can maybe learn a thing or two from me by seeing how I've done it.
Right, exactly.
Do you mind if I ask you a little bit? I mean, we've mentioned really quickly a few times about developer relations. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about Dev a little bit. In the particular role that me and Jasmine play, like, I like to think of us as like the liaison or the conduit between the company and the community, right? So, as much as we do a lot of public events like workshops and speaking and hackathons and things of that nature, it's also important for us to engage a lot with product engineering and bring them useful feedback from the folks that we're engaging with in the community. So it's a two-way relationship. I think one of the challenging parts of that relationship is one, trying to establish trust on both sides of the table, right? Because, the folks in the community might think like, oh, well, he's a marketer and he's trying to sell me stuff. You know what I mean? And then like the folks on the engineering side would be like, well, he's not technical enough and he doesn't know whatever. And so like, I think it's important for us to try and establish trust on both sides. And then once we do that, that's when things kind of start to click, right? Like, so now, we could champion the interesting products and features and, capabilities that are happening on the product engineering side to the community. And then we can also take the problems that they're having, but even the successes that they're having, and take it back to the product team so they could know how the product is being used and what people are thinking about them. And then, once that relationship is there, like it only ends up making all of us better at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, I agree with Cecil. All feedback can be useful feedback and can make a difference, in what those next release notes will be, or the next service or product or update will be.
Yeah, I like that idea of having someone that I can talk to at maybe an event, or maybe just a name that I can send an email to, or someone on Twitter that says, hey, I'm seeing a little friction using this particular documentation or this particular feature, and I was wondering, can we have a chat about that? And then, so I guess it's a little bit like the developer advocacy roles that a few folks have, I guess, at Microsoft, where you can say, hey, this thing isn't necessarily the greatest experience. Here's what I've had so far. Here's the experience I've had so far. Here are the issues I found, and here are the great things about it. Could you maybe pass this detail back on to someone on the team, or can you maybe point out what I did that caused this experience to be suboptimal, and what I can do to stop it from being like that in the future. Maybe it's the way I've used the tools. Maybe it's because I'm trying to write an ASP.NET framework application on a Linux machine and I don't have Mono, and I don't understand the differences between operating systems, and I'm just bashing my head against the keyboard. Maybe that's it. But then hopefully you would hope that's covered in docs. It's a really bad example. But yeah, I like this idea of having someone to talk to that you could put a name and a face to and say, hey, Cecil, or hey, Jasmine, I have had this problem. I was wondering, can you help me out?
Yeah, a nice thing about that is not only do we have, one-on-ones or, face-to-face interactions with folks who are interested or are already using Azure or even VS or VS Code, but also being able to have like normal recurring meetings with these product teams. So with all of our entire team, we have folks who have taken a lead on kind of being the liaison between us and product teams. So what'll happen is, some of these meetings will, there'll be, advocates that are interested in learning about like the next things that are coming about a particular Azure service. And, so they'll have somebody, either, a PM or even an engineer come and talk to us about, what's happening. And then also give space for us to kind of talk about any maybe content development around that, or any like just good stories to tie in to content. So it's kind of a two-way street when we have these, these meetings. It's like they're sharing, these product teams are sharing with us, the advocates, what's coming and, what they're excited about and what they're working on. And we are giving them feedback and showing them content and the things that we're building with the things that they are building and creating.
Sure. Okay. So I guess in that aspect, then, as a user of the technology, as a user of the product, as I think I've heard a lot of people use the word customer, but yeah, as someone who is using the technology and the product, I can then provide feedback, and maybe that feedback can go into the next version, or maybe I can say, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could do this thing with this technology? And then, maybe that could provide, maybe enough people are asking for it that there's reason for you to take that back to whomever you take that back to, and put a case forward and say, hey, I've had 5,000 people ask me, why can't I do this with Visual Studio? Why can't I do debugging JavaScript inside of Visual Studio? Bad example, but let's say that 5,000 people all message you on the same day, which would be distressing, I guess, about being able to do this. And then you can take that to someone, and then there can be whatever experiments need to be done, whatever thought process, whatever work needs to be done. And then at the end of it, maybe 6 months to a year later, because I don't know the cadence of these things, there's this new tool comes out that people can use, and someone who would maybe I put that suggestion in, and then I feel great because I'm like, hey, somebody's listening, and it's made this tool a lot better, at least for me anyway.
Yes, exactly.
So with that said then, we've talked about developer advocacy. What is, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are your favorite ways to try and impart knowledge on someone? So let's say you're trying to mentor someone, maybe you're trying to teach someone something. I know that I talked about that sort of practical, let's do something and I'll show you why it's that. I gave the example of the rockets and I gave the example of the wheels, but what about yourselves, especially with technology? There's no best, I'm using bunny quotes again, there's no best way to teach someone because, like you both said earlier, and everybody learns in different ways, but what would you say is a great way for you to sort of teach something? We've talked a lot about learning, but what about teaching?
One of the things I always tell my students is, like, if you really care about something, like, you got to put effort into it. If you want to learn how to be a technologist, you want to learn how to do design or 3D modeling, whatever the case is, like, you got to put effort into it. And I find for you to put effort into it, like, it has to be something that's like personal to you, for you to be consistent, right? Consistency is important. So one of the things that I always say is, why don't you look at your life, look at the things that you do, your hobbies, your, whatever the case is, going to movies, playing video games, whatever, and let's see how we could apply technology to it to make it better. So I'll give you an example. So I had a student and, his family was into like going to like fresh markets and, like these little pop-up shops where people are selling produce, like different fruits and vegetables and things of that nature. And I'm like, it's something he does every weekend with his family. I'm like, well, that's such a part of your life. It's like already a habit for you, right? Like, it's a normal occurrence. Why don't you make a website for it? Like, teach yourself the things that we learned in class about HTML and CSS and Java and web servers and, hosting and DNS and like all of these things, and apply it to something that you care about. And I find when you do that, obviously, like, it's something that you care about, it's something that you're really passionate about. I find like you're more likely to stick to it. You're more likely to remain consistent with it. I'm more likely to follow through with it. And again, like, whether your methodology is watching videos or reading or just hands-on tinkering until you figure it out, you know what I mean? I think it just starts with, like, what can I do to make this thing interesting for me, right? And again, one of the ways I do that is, again, like, take something that you care about, whether it's sports, racing, maybe you're into flowers, maybe you're into, gardening, maybe you're into collecting stamps. I don't know if people still collect stamps, but, if that's a thing, you could do that and, apply technology to it, right? Create a website, create a mobile app, create something, or, take what you've learned in your course, your class, your lecture, and try and apply that to something that means something to you.
Yeah, I feel like I do a little bit of that too. But the way that I also like to teach, especially when I'm teaching code, is I like to kind of, I guess it's like a form of pair programming. So whenever I teach a new concept, I show an example and I usually live code it right there in front of the students. I do it because I'm going to usually sometimes make a mistake, and it's good for them to see that, sometimes it's a process. There's definitely been times where I've had to like search for something that didn't work properly. And I think the students really enjoy that aspect of, oh, this person, has been doing this for, years, and they had to look something up. I think they appreciate, me being able to be vulnerable like that. And then we also have a part where we'll all code together. So they'll kind of like follow after me. So I'll like write something and I'll be explaining it, write something down, or I'll type something out. and explain it, and then they, follow along. So at the end, we all have the same, outcome, and we talk about the process to get there. So when I'm not doing that from the instructor lens, or in a classroom setting, I like to use screen sharing. So I have been really loving VS Code's live share. That's been a great resource. I also really enjoy this tool called Glitch. It is a online tool that allows you to build things like websites, small websites right there in the browser. All your files are right there. So you with the press of a button, you can see the output of the website that you've created. And then the nice thing is that people can actually come and watch and follow along and watch as you're, creating the site. So, and then, you, with an account, you have the site that you built also has an address. So, whenever you're done, you can share it with somebody else, and then someone else can kind of do this thing called remixing, where you have this project done and somebody wants a copy of it, very similar to a GitHub fork. You remix the project so you have a copy of it on your own that you can go ahead and update and change if you'd like. And then the other thing is that on Glitch, you have the feature of being able to ask for help from the community. So someone can hop onto your project and come and help you out and show you and point out the points that you're having issues with, or help you fix them.
I like that. And it fits really well with what you both said about take that knowledge and apply it, make it fit. Cecil, I think you used that word, that phrase of something that you enjoy, something that you need, something that fits within your life. And, I think it works again, with what Jasmine's saying about taking this thing and actually doing it, do the thing, because technology is very much a doing activity. You can sit and you can learn all of the theory, but eventually you're going to have to sit behind a computer and do something with it, And I think it's very similar with, say, music. You can sit and learn the scales in your head. You can sit and learn how to read the musical notes. But until you're sat behind an instrument or have an instrument with you and are actually physically interacting with it, you're not really doing anything musical, I guess. I guess you could make the argument that, what about a conductor, or what about a writer? There's still that experience of you can't press these 5 notes on the keyboard at the same time because 3 of them are over here and the other 2 are on the other end of the keys, and you literally, figuratively can't reach. But with technology, you need to be in front of the computer and doing the thing. And I like that. I like the whole look at what it is about your life that you like to do and apply that. I think, the example you gave there, Cecil, was create a website. And the example you gave there, Jasmine, of standing in front of a group of people and saying, let's do this live now. And if I get stuck, you'll see what happens when I get stuck. Or when I do something wrong, you're going to see what happens when I do something wrong. I think it's similar to what happens with Mixer and Twitch. People sort of live coding. I really like to watch those. And that's a bit of a pair programming experience as well. Even with some of the greats, people have been doing this for years, like yourselves. They get stuck and they'll ask the audience, hey, can you figure this out? I can't figure it out. And then the host and the audience go on a full journey of, let's learn why it didn't work. And it takes it on this new sort of trajectory. The live coding thing goes back to something I did at uni. So one of my lecturers, the first lecturer that we had for Computer Science 101 using C# and .NET, he would take us through a certain topic and would bring up Notepad. Like, he would bring from the command line, open up Notepad and create a file, and then use the command line C# compiler to compile the app, but would have it on several screens around him so we could all see. And we would watch him type out all this code, and he'd make a typo, and someone would shout out, hey, you've done that wrong, or you've done that wrong. And looking back now, it was obvious he was doing parts wrong to see whether we were paying attention. But some parts, not so much. And that's really great too, because then you're like, oh, hey, the teacher becomes the student? I was about to say the master becomes the student. That's not quite right. So the teacher becomes the student. This whole, hey, you told us how to, it's that applying thing, like you guys were both saying, that applying thing.
Yeah, I like that tactic too of, making a mistake on purpose to see if they're following along. And I also really like when they, raise their hand and like, hey, I think this part is wrong. You think you might need to fix that? It means, it makes you, it's just really affirming. It feels like, it makes you feel like you're doing something right, and they're actually, absorbing what you're learning. Also, there has definitely been a time where I've definitely made a mistake and passed off as a learning experience, where I would say, oh, I forgot, or I made a mistake on this thing, and someone pointed out, and I'm like, okay, just making sure you all learn. But inside, I'm like, oh no, that was actually a real mistake.
It's funny.
I like that, being able to pass it off as I was testing you all. I guess all that really remains to say is thank you ever so much for being on the show. We've gone on a long time. I loved this conversation. It was fantastic. I could talk about teaching and learning and education, or listen to someone talking about teaching and learning and education for days, because it's something I'm really in my own life really passionate about. You've both been fantastic and indulging me in that kind of thing. So thank you ever so much for being on the show and helping me learn a little bit more about what Microsoft are trying to do to help people learn, and how people can help Microsoft to help other people learn, I guess. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I mean, I think it was definitely a pleasure for both of us to be on the show, and anytime at all you want to have another conversation, we're totally free for it, whether it's recorded or not.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much. And definitely, I will definitely get in contact with you both again, because it's a lot of fun. And I love learning about learning, is how I'll put it. But one last thing then, if folks want to get in contact with you or want to learn a little bit more about you, can they do that? And if so, how can they do that?
Sure. For me, the main one is Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Paladique. That's PALADIQUE.
Yeah, and I'm also fairly active on Twitter as well. So I'm just at Cecil Phillip. And also, so if you feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn too. I use that not as often as I'm on Twitter, but both of them work equally as well.
Oh, fantastic. I'll make sure to put links in the show notes so people can click through, because sometimes it's hard, if you're driving along or you're going for a run or something, it's hard to sort of recall that at a later stage. So I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes for anyone who's interested. Seriously, thank you both for being on the podcast. I know that it's taken some time out of your workday to talk to me, and very much expecting you both to have to run off to meetings or run off to some important thing to do. So thank you ever so much for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
That was my interview with Jasmine Green and Cecil Phillip of Microsoft. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for some more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks.